So here we are, Zach. We actually are meeting right now, but I'd been reading you and following some of your lectures and statements. Can you introduce yourself?
Certainly, my name is Zachary Foster. I am a Jewish American. I'm a historian of Palestine. I have a newsletter called Palestine Nexus. I teach courses on Zionism and Palestine, also at PalestineNexus.com.
Okay. So I'm Martin Gag. I mean, this is my Substack, so people somewhat know me, but I'm a broadcast journalist. I've been for many years at Deutsche Welle as a producer in international politics. And as the Jewish atheist religious affairs correspondent with a specific focus on the Vatican. So um, I am, as you can imagine, in the middle of the German storm of philo-Semitism. And I'd been sort of quite attentive to you and I suppose the kind of people that had been more or less digging the same burrows in terms of what Judaism means as we're looking from a distance at Gaza. Now we can probably also talk about the West Bank and its extension into Lebanon and Syria. Um, so I know that for a long while you'd been pointing out a Zionism with deep roots in a, if not anti-Semitic, at least certainly not a Jewish project. That this is a Jewish project that essentially comes into play only about 150 to 200 years ago. But your point, and I've seen you make it several times, is that it's really a 1640s or thereabout phenomenon that really takes hold among essentially Reformation readers. So can you go a bit farther into this? And perhaps we don't have a lot of time to go all the way through, but I think it's worthwhile thematizing the point.
Absolutely. I would date Zionism to the 16th century. I think that with the Protestant Reformation in Europe, you get a return to biblical literalism. It's not really a return, it is a turn to biblical literalism. That is, forget about the Catholic Church. We don't need the Bible to be filtered through these Catholic priests. Instead, we can just read the book ourselves. And there you have it. Genesis chapter 12, Genesis chapter 15, Deuteronomy, all these passages in the Bible talking about how God promised uh, the land of Israel, the Holy Land, the promised land, to Abraham and his offspring. And so Europeans are looking around Europe and they say, aha, look, these are the offspring of Abraham, these Jews living in Europe. And and that is really the origins of Zionism, because by the 1640s, you have a movement in England known as Restorationism. And these restorationists believe, for eschatological reasons, that at the end of days, there will be an ingathering of Jews in the Holy Land, and this is going to bring about the second coming of Jesus Christ. It's going to bring about the
I
rapture.
I mean, I think that what I find quite interesting about the story, I mean, is that there is a certain historical arch. We really have about 300 years of complete oblivion about the fact that there is sort of a strong Christian root. And you also make the point about anti-Semitic elements, particularly. I've seen you talk about Hungary, yeah? But I mean, I think both you and I probably have read enough on this to know that it goes much deeper. I mean, there is a pretty clear tie in the Nazi operation and so on and so forth. But what is quite interesting is that Zionism remains essentially strongly attached to Judaism until we begin to see American evangelicalism sort of pull on these strings once again, particularly around the question of the rebuilding of the temple as a prophetic element in the return of Jesus. So something that really had been somehow, I wouldn't say completely away, but certainly had not been the leitmotif, becomes in the Republican sort of recuperation of evangelicalism essentially a fairly strong force of, I would say, one of the strongest forces behind the new Zionism again. Would you agree with that? Do you think that this says there's anything to it?
Certainly in the past few decades, evangelical Protestants, especially in the United States, but also in Europe, have embraced Zionism in a way that Christians before never did. I mean, there was a Christian Zionism in the United States. that goes all the way back to the 19th century, as we said. um, I would say that movement that we talked about in the 1640s, 50s, and 60s in Europe, that movement of restorationists gets picked up in 1840s England, and you have this wave of Protestant Christians, restorationists, who are writing books and pamphlets about the restoration of Palestine to the Jews. You even have British colonial officials. For example, the British consul in Damascus in 1840 says, "I call for the establishment of a Jew state in Palestine." Right. So this movement in Britain is a carry on, is of those 16th, 17th century British Protestants. And then again, it's kind of a straight line from the 1840s all the way to the John Hagees and the Pat Robertsons of the world today. They're all talking about a Jewish return to Palestine, Jewish restoration in Palestine, as a way to bring about the second coming of Jesus
I
Christ.
mean, there is an important element here, which is that it might sound like a bit of a particular theological particularism, but you cannot dig the soil of a mosque. So, in fact, you would need to have some sort of catastrophic warlike event in order for the temple to be rebuilt where today stands Al-Aqsa, right? So, I
Yeah.
mean, this kind of, I think, to me, goes a very long way to explain why is it that, in fact, it's not really merely a question of supporting the construction of a Jewish state, but there is a very belligerent and very violent trend that is also supported, because what you actually need in order for the reconstruction of the temple is wanton destruction. Um,
Yes. 100%. Just a quick point on that. The U.S. Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, when in 2019 he gave a speech, or maybe it was 2018, he gave a speech in Jerusalem at the King David Hotel, where he talked about exactly what you're talking about right now. That one of the things, the signs of this second coming of Christ, is the rebuilding of the temple, and it's not just some theoretical abstract, we're gonna no, it's we're gonna literally rebuild the temple brick by brick. And he says, and he even says in that speech, like facts on the ground matter,
Facts
right?
on the
That
ground matter. Excellent. Yeah,
facts
yeah,
on the
yeah,
ground
yeah,
matter.
yeah, yeah. Incredible, incredible. I was not aware of it. It's just really stunning because, in a way, I mean, it shows. I think it's a very nice vignette of the entire policy operation in Israel, right? I mean, the fact is that, excuse my French, but fuck the law, fuck international law. It's really about the facts in the ground. And
Yeah,
whoever actually, I mean, it's almost like people licking the handle of the car, right? I got it first. It's really quite something. I actually wanted to sort of have you talk maybe a little bit about. Um, I mean, there is obviously a massive amount of literature and a massive amount of things to be said about the question of anti-Semitic um, Zionism, particularly in the evangelical grounds, which obviously, when the theological rubber hits the asphalt, so to say, I mean, there is clearly not much sympathy for the theological position of Jews in the great scheme of redemption. But what I also find uh, quite important in this equation is um, anti-Semitic, so Zionist anti-Semitism as opposed to Zionist anti-Semitic Zionism. So all of
mm,
these Zionists, like Nordo, like Ahad, which was probably the lesser evil, but people like Herzl writing Mauscheln, Gordon, and keep counting and keep counting. Jabotinsky, of course, perhaps one of the ugliest ones. With a really strong echo of some of the ugliest anti-Semitism of Europe, deep within the Zionist ideological corpus.
that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Um, you just cited some of the most prominent examples of this in the 1880s. Max Nordau, he's German, a Jew. He is a popular playwright and a popular author. Some of his works are some of the best-selling works in Europe at the time, and his works are replete with anti-Semitic stereotypes of the Jews. It's unclear exactly why he's doing this. He wants to be accepted among Europe. He doesn't want to be known as a Jew, maybe. but he embraces those stereotypes. He internalizes them. Theodor Herzl, excuse my German pronunciation, Dimaschen, is this? It's a derogatory term. And in the first sentence of that pamphlet, it's a 20-page pamphlet he publishes in the 1890s. The first sentence of the pamphlet says, "Any Jew who is not a Zionist is a Mashal."
Mhm.
It's a derogatory term that you
Yeah,
would
yeah,
use to
it's
describe
essentially kike. It's essentially kike
Tyke,
in yeah, 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 sure.
because he believes that as a Jew, if you why is Theodor Herzl a Zionist? Why is Max Nordau a Zionist? Why is Arthur Rupin, Zavotinsky? Why do they embrace Zionism? Because they internalize all of these anti-Semitic stereotypes about Jews. They're weak. They're downtrodden. They accept. They're subjugated peoples, and they despise that about Jews, right?
I
Because
think
the
that there
traditional,
is. I think it's
yeah,
true. I mean, I do what I do see in the articulation of the Jew and Jabotinsky's particularly. I mean, Jabotinsky after Herzl, really a year after his death, writes this absolutely outrageous eulogy, which is full of this sort of soteriology. I mean, this holy Saint Herzl, and the depiction of the Jew is really this sort of weakling, treasonous, incompetent, effeminate. I mean, there is
yeah,
something just absolutely lecherous and disgusting about it. And he actually describes, I mean, the separation between the Jew and the Hebrew, sort of putting the
mhm,
Hebrew sort of in this camp of the Maccabean strength and like this manly thing. What I always find very strange about it is that not only it echoes, of course, the Superman of the Nazis, and I mean certain idea of masculinity that you find, for instance, in the Sokol, which is the sports movement of the
yep,
Slavic East within the Habsburgian Empire, and so on and so forth. The Italians are doing this also a bit later, but it's also remarkable that that kind of Zionism falls into the same sort of irredentism of the rest of Europe. So the French in Alsace and Lorraine want, like, to return to Mother France. The Germans in Sudetenland eventually become one of the excuses for Hitler's invasion. And the Jews need their own ghetto, which to me, and perhaps, I mean, I'm finally circling to the main thing I wanted to talk to you about. Uh, I am a Jew from Argentina. I mean, I grew up in a family that was extremely reluctant Zionists, probably just out of, I mean, they were not Zionists in any significant way other than the fact that, okay, Zionism was there, but I would never really move. Right. I mean, I would send like a couple of euros, a couple of dollars, perhaps, to the Tel Aviv University. But the notion that I would give up my matzo balls for falafel and hummus, hummus and falafel growing up to me were as exotic as sushi. So I mean, and I mean this very seriously. It was really something that was a taste from distant land. Um, and it seems to me that a lot of what Zionism was, but especially what we have seen now with our naked eyes, is antithetical not only to Judaism, but it's antithetical to all the framework, legal and political framework that has kept us Jews in the diaspora alive. That is to say, if I am here today and I was not beaten up in the streets or killed, it's because democratic values, equal rights, equal obligations, so on and so rule of law are things that were essential. The idea that I would have survived in an Argentina that was actually exclusively for Catholics, and then everybody else comes behind is clearly nonsense. And I think that intuitively, a lot of the people that I grew up with, and I'm probably a bit older than you, I mean, I'm 50, um, have that intuition. What I'm seeing, and this is kind of what I want to ask you. Um, I have two hypotheses. One is that the Zionist consensus in the Jewish community essentially has died, and we have not seen the corpse rotting yet, but the signs are there. And the second one is that, in fact, there is a brewing civil war around this issue in Judaism. Is this something that you see? I mean, do you think that this at all?
yeah. Those are really great points. I think that the traditional American Jewish establishment, there's about a dozen or so major American Jewish organizations, and they're all Zionist. There's no exceptions, zero exceptions. In fact, you might even say that it's beyond Zionism, because Zionism almost has replaced Judaism as the religion of these institutions. By which I mean, you can declare you're an atheist, you'll be welcome in these institutions. You could desecrate the Sabbath in public all the time. You could eat pork and treif on Yom Kippur, doesn't matter. The only thing that's sacred to these institutions is Israel. And that's why, by the way, Peter Beinart, who's just recently published a book arguing that the American Jewish establishment has embraced idolatry, which is one of the three things in Judaism that you're supposed to say, you know what, if you're going to force me to do this, I would just, you can kill me instead, but I'm never going to do this.
Right.
There's only three things that
In
Judaism
which,
says
yeah,
you should accept death before doing these things. One of them is idolatry. And what is idolatry? Idolatry is saying that you're placing something ahead of God. You're basically saying that no matter what, thick and thin, it doesn't matter what's true or what's false, I will always support this thing. And that's the state of Israel. And that's why it's a litmus test. If you don't, if you say, Israel does not have the right to exist as a Jewish state, well, you're excommunicated from the American Jewish community. So, in fact, what is fair to say today, circa 2025, is that Zionism is the religion of American Jews. It has replaced Judaism as the religion of American Jews, and thus I think you're correct that in the coming years, if and decades, you're going to see a split. American Judaism will eventually. I don't know if it's going to be kind of a new movement that is somehow outside of Judaism, or whether within Judaism we'll have sort of anti-genocide Jews and pro-genocide Jews, and it will, but it will become similar to the divides you see like conservative, reform, orthodox. There will be a kind of a political litmus test, a political divide. Either you support apartheid and genocide or you reject it.
it's really remarkable. I mean, you know, I am in a sort of political context in which it's not just that there is the wholesale support of Israel, but you have Israelis essentially coming in different forms, sort of diplomats and they're pretty much befriending neo Nazis. And I don't say this in sort of a metaphorical sense. I mean, the person that basically built the figure of the international Jew, Soros as the international Jew for Orban, was George Birnbaum, who was the chief of staff of Netanyahu. And, there were sort of 10 good years of the most rancid anti-Semitism, with all the sort of bells and whistles, right? I mean, you could really just tell by looking at the pictures. In Poland, where, the Likud has been making very good friends in the PIS, uh, the rank and file was supporting the burning in effigy of Jews in places like Wrocław during Easter, which is an old tradition. Don't get me wrong. I'm a fairly conservative guy, but I would think that that's where you draw the line, right? I mean, when you start burning Jews in effigy, and the thing that gets me every single time is that Israel has made it so that Bernie Sanders is an anti-Semite, but Orban is a righteous among the nations. And there is something about this that I would imagine that even my grandmother would find absolutely impossible to. I mean, it requires a form of political, ideological, and historical schizophrenia that I
Well,
want to imagine that most people are nowhere incapable of.
well, when you realize, if you accept what I just said is true, that the religion of American Jews is Zionism, not Judaism, well, then it follows that people who support Zionism are allies. Those allies could be neo-Nazis. They could be anti-Semites, right? I mean, anti-Semites in the sense that they don't like Jews. But remember, as you said, American Judaism is about Zionism, not about Judaism. And so what follows, obviously, is that we're going to befriend anti-Semites and neo-Nazis and autocrats and whoever supports Israel. And so that will obviously include people that are deeply anti-Semitic,
Yeah.
that are sympathetic to neo-Nazis.
Well, I think that this is, in a sense, is also perfectly practical, right? I mean, you alluded to this a bit earlier, and I heard you talk about this before, but I think the point is worth repeating, which is there is a logic of mutual exclusivity by right wing nut jobs, which is, you take your dirty Jews and we'll take your pure Aryans. Right. So, and on the other side, you have, well, we'll take our, like, holy Jews to the Holy Land and you keep your Aryans yourself. So, I mean, in this logic of mutual exclusivity, which is essentially a return to what Bannon very much likes to call the return of the nation. And I think it should not be surprising at all that the Bannon machine with the Trump machine with the Likud and all of these things, Orban and Farage are essentially operating a network. It is really a logic of mutual exclusivity. Do you what is actually maybe I'll just start the question the other way. It's been a return to images of evil that I only knew from description and very, very few sort of graphic material, what I've seen in Gaza. And as I try to explain every time I get engaged in these conversations, I have two very young children. I have one that is 5, so exactly almost the age of the Vivas children who were taken back from Niros. Uh, and I was thinking about, and I'm writing about this. I mean, I don't trust anybody that sees first two Jewish kids and then their own kids, much in the way, and this has been my fight, very much so. People that see first two Palestinians or one Palestinian before they see one child, before they see Hind Rajab, before they can hear those cries and recognize their own children cry in the middle of the night. I mean, I think that we had been shown something that it's very difficult to put words into it. Um, what do you sense the Jewish community in the middle of the? I mean, once you actually peel this layer of loyalty to the Israeli project, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you think is happening around us in the Jewish community?
We've been raised for decades and decades on this belief that Israel has the right to exist. This is doctrine. And anyone who comes around and says, well, actually, in international law, states don't have rights to exist. States are not holier than thou. No, people have a right to exist. Peoples have rights to exist, but states do not. No international law, no internet customary international law or any treaty says this state has a right to exist forever and ever and ever in international law. That's just not how the Westphalian state system works. States come and go. But peoples, individuals have rights under international law. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, of the kind of foundational charter of the post World War II era. That is something we should hold dear. But unfortunately, the American Jewish community, it doesn't see things that way. For them, Israel is sacred. Israel as a Jewish state is sacred, and thus we will do whatever it takes to make sure that Israel's security is guaranteed, and that Israel's future is guaranteed, even if it means supporting genocide, even if it means supporting what every single human rights organization calls apartheid. It doesn't matter. There are no red lines. There's nothing Israel can do that would lead these American Jewish organizations to think otherwise.
But
It's
I guess my question, I think you're completely right. I think you're absolutely right about the fact that there is sort of a complete defense of impunity. This is how I see it. But at the same time, I find it extremely difficult to believe that the people that I'm hearing that are in the community, right? The people out, I'm not talking about Betar, who are essentially hooligans and terrorists, but I'm
yeah,
talking about the grandmother that, like, sort of, my mother is almost 80 years old. And I think that the shelter is that she just doesn't see it. I mean, if she were to see 20,000 children, I mean, 20,000 children, we're talking about the Tophet. We're talking
yeah,
about basically the political sacrifice of children, not
yeah.
only Jewish children. I mean, not only Palestinian children, Jewish children as well.
The propaganda runs very deep. Um, uh, but you're right. I mean, I'm trying to explain how these people have come to accept genocide as normal. Obviously, it's not normal, but I'm trying to understand how they arrived at that position. Well, the indoctrination runs very, very deep, right? Anyone who waves the Palestinian flag is anti-Semitic. Anyone calling for supporting Gaza supports Hamas and thus supports killing innocent Israelis. It they've exaggerated the death toll. Oh, they're lying about the starvation conditions. Oh, Hamas this, Hamas. They're all supporting Hamas. There's no innocent people there. They all passed out candy to the Hamas members coming back into Gaza. They
As if pretty
celebrate.
much any of these statements were actually sufficient to justify the sniping of children and the killing of 19,000,
You're right. I mean, how do you justify these things? But this is what they tell themselves. I mean, they use civilians as human shields. We're trying our best to avoid it. You know, the IDF is so moral. We're trying our best to avoid civilian casualties, but they're hiding in hospitals. They're hiding in schools. So what can we do? What would
It's,
you have done?
I have to tell
You know,
you that it's the first time in my entire life, and I've been, I mean, I come from philosophy, so my area was actually ethics. And coming out of Argentina, 30,000 people disappeared in the 70s. These were very uh, issues very close to my heart and my biography. I have never really heard the use of the term human shield as synonymous with legitimate target. In general, I mean, if you, I don't know if you saw this. I mean, you must remember The Usual Suspects, in which Kaiser Soze kills his two children, and it's a completely outrageous scene, precisely because the human shields are actually accepted as targets. Israel has essentially taken, I mean, not really a citation I would have liked to make if I were to record this. I would leave that out. But in any case, it's absolutely, it buggers belief, the idea that you would actually present the argument that human shields are legitimately liable to harm. It's something that I simply cannot quite understand. I want to ask you one perhaps almost final question, almost. um, do you think that there is Judaism after Gaza, and if there is Judaism after Gaza, what does it look like? What happens with people like
yeah,
us? I mean, you come from the left. I come from essentially the center right.
yeah. Well, it's a very good question, and it's a very difficult one to answer because what we've all seen is we've seen Jewish symbols, Jewish prayers, weaponized in the name of apartheid and genocide. I mean, we all saw the Israeli soldiers chanting the Shema on the ruins of homes that they've destroyed in Gaza. We see the Jewish Star of David etched onto Palestinian detainees. We see it etched onto the homes of the destroyed homes of Palestinians in Gaza. We see it etched onto bulldozers used in Jenin to ethnically cleanse 40,000 Palestinians. So, you know, how can I, as a Jew, now wave,
Absolutely.
when I use the Jew, when I show the Jewish Star of David, now I'm displaying a symbol of
Yeah.
genocide.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
or when I sing the Shema, I'm singing the same prayer that's used to justify genocide. It's just, how do I bring myself to continue to identify as Jewish, embrace Jewish symbols, Jewish prayers, in a world where those Jewish prayers have been used and weaponized and denigrated? So it's a very good question. I don't know what to say. Like I said, I do see Judaism diverging. I think there's going to be base, and we're already seeing this, by the way. In New York City, you have these kind of non-Zionist minions popping up for the reason that I don't, as a Jew, as a Torah believing Jew, as a Jew who wants to participate in the Jewish community, I don't want to be associated with genocide. And so there will be a new movement of Jews who reject the state of Israel, who want to have nothing to do with Israel. By the way, maybe they're even Zionists. They just don't support genocide.
Yeah.
And so they just
Yeah.
don't want to have
Absolutely. Of
anything to
course.
do
Yeah.
with Israel.
It's really, I was faced with a very strange situation. I have very close Palestinian friends. I would say I have Palestinian family virtually, people that have put a roof over my head when I couldn't. And I was actually thinking about this a couple of days ago. I mean, we tend to have, my family always had a lot of very diverse people around Shabbat tables. And I mean, it's really almost heart wrenching. It really, I mean, I have a knot on the throat when I think that I would not be willing to put Palestinian friends in front of a Star of David during a Shabbat, because it would be essentially putting in their face the symbol of probably the murder of their cousins or of their brothers or of their sisters. Is I feel, there is a sense of violation and of desecration, that and of betrayal, that is so profound that I almost, I have no way really to fully put it into words.
The most viral tweets, posts that I write are those where I criticize those Israeli Jews weaponizing Jewish symbols in the name of genocide. Because Jews, they just can't handle that. Jewish Zionists supporting the state of Israel, just they hate those tweets. it really rattles them. Because why? Because I'm striking a nerve. Because what I'm saying is obviously correct. And
Yeah,
they
yeah,
just
yeah, sure.
don't, and for them it's, oh my God, oh my God, we're actually destroying Judaism. He's onto something.
Yeah. I mean, you know, Israel could not even, I mean, Jews could not even play Wagner after the Second World War. Just imagine sort of facing people that you care for with the symbols of their destruction.
I mean, my mom, daughter of Holocaust survivors, she to this day, I think, doesn't like buying German products, you know? I mean, here we are 8 decades later, even buying a product, and Germany's the most like pro-Israel country on planet Earth,
On the
which is
planet.
the irony
On the
of it
planet,
all.
I would actually agree with that full heartedly. I mean, it is, my father used to come here in the early tens, and a couple of years after I moved, and ask why Germany? How can you do this? I cannot go too far into that because we don't have a lot of time. But I would say that it's been consistent a bit, that this kind of this mechanism of desecration, this mechanism of trivialization. I mean, seeing, Gilad Erdan, the former hooligan of Israel at the United Nations, turning the yellow star of David into a logotype with the slogan "Never Again." Is now. I mean, that kind of thing in which the most sacred expression of the deepest of sufferings that should have taught us that this is something that we don't want anybody ever should mourn and keen for their children, for the dead children, carry the bodies, never ever again, have actually brought it forth. And this is something that continues to play in my head. I feel that all my dead family between Ukraine and Moldova is being recruited into a genocide and an apartheid project. And this is another sense of disgust. I mean, really a deep sense of anger.
Yeah. I really struggle more than I ever have struggled in Jewish communities because I mean, including when I'm with my own family. I mean, you're talking about people who are otherwise very progressive. They support human rights all around the world. They would be
Right,
the first people to
right.
donate to human rights organizations, criticizing autocratic governments, criticizing all these horrible things in the world, except for Israel, where they seem to have a kind of amnesia when it comes to Palestinian suffering. They're incapable of sympathizing with the victims of the world's first live stream genocide. It's again, indoctrination is very powerful. Media discourse is very powerful, and it's very very hard for these people to turn a stone and see things from a new perspective after decades after an entire life of indoctrination. I mean,
I, I
that's
have
what.
asked I have asked many, many times, and I have never gotten an answer as to what Israel would need to do, from family and from friends
Right.
and from acquaintances, what Israel would need to do for you to abandon it. And there is no answer. I mean, I have actually gotten people to tell me there is absolutely nothing. Gas chambers and all, that would still be an expression of loyalty. And I find this impossible. I mean, it's really just, I feel I belong to another species, right? Anyway, Zach, I am really grateful. It is for me both, very informative, but also probably quite therapeutic, because a sense of isolation has been fairly brutal, for all reasons that I'm sure that you yourself understand. So, if at any point you feel just like shooting the breeze on chat, I mean, let's certainly do it. And if you come to Berlin, I will take you for a pork free. I'll pay for the pork, which my father says that if it was free pork, then it's kosher.
Love it. I would love that, Martin. Thank you so much for hosting this conversation. You have a wonderful perspective on things, and always happy to do it again.
I appreciate it very much. Have a lovely morning. Here is already the end of the day.
Sounds great. Take care.
Take care. Bye. Bye. Bye.